The night air in Memphis felt thick as syrup, the street lamps casting halos over empty sidewalks. Elvis Presley slipped behind the wheel of his dark Cadillac, its engine humming low, and let the city's neon blur past him. He'd just left the studio, voice still echoing in his head, when the call came from Tony, a boyhood friend whose life had tangled with these same streets. His son was in cuffs, facing charges that could ruin him. Without a word to his team, Elvis drove into the heart of his old neighborhood, past shuttered storefronts and cracked pavement, heart pounding with a father's fear and a friend's loyalty. Gone was the swagger of a legend. In its place, a man desperate to save someone he loved. Instincts honed not for applause, but for one more chance at redemption. Elvis eased his old Cadillac to a halt under the weak glow of a lone street lamp, its yellow halo flickering as if uncertain whether to stay alight. It was well past midnight in Memphis, the city's usual hum of life reduced to the distant drone of a lone freight train and the whisper of cicadas in the humid summer air. He cut the engine and sat for a moment, hands gripping the worn steering wheel, his mind racing faster than the night. The message from Joe, his childhood friend now broken and desperate, had left no room for delay. His son, caught in some petty scuffle that had escalated, was in custody several blocks away. Elvis didn't question why he'd come alone. Instinct lent him bravery he sometimes lacked in quieter moments. He slipped from the car in a plain white t-shirt and faded jeans, barely resembling the king everyone knew. His hair, mussed from a long day in the studio, caught the street lamp's shimmer as he approached a makeshift checkpoint set up at the end of the block. 2 patrol cars sat idling, their blue lights casting wavering patterns across the asphalt. A squad of officers, faces drawn and uniforms creased, huddled around clipboards. Elvis walked forward, his gait purposeful but unhurried. "Evening," he called softly, voice rough from singing. "I'm looking for Officer Hayes. My friend's boy. He's in lockup somewhere down the line. Can you point me to where they're holding him?" He kept his tone level, hands visible, unconcealed, a gesture meant to calm. The nearest young officer, new to the Memphis force, it showed in his clenched jaw and jittery eyes, snapped to attention. He squared his shoulders and barked, "Sir, back up. Keep your hands where I can see 'em." A hand hovered near the holstered .45 at his hip. Elvis froze, every muscle tensing. The boy's gaze flicked to the king's plain face, as if seeking some sign of recognition. But the patrolman saw only an unknown man, intruding on police business. He took a half-step forward, pistol drawn in a glint of steel. "Easy, son," Elvis said, raising his palms just enough to reveal the worn gold ring on his right hand. "I don't mean any trouble." His heart pounded, each breath deliberate. Night air felt suddenly thick, as though laden with tension and the threat of violence. The young officer's gun twitched. "Hands where I can see 'em! Who are you? Show ID!" Elvis's mind raced. He could have introduced himself. The king of rock and roll, vintage Cadillac, the works. But that might have made things worse. His pulse hammered in his ears. "I'm just a man looking for answers," he replied, voice steady but soft. "No need for a holster to do this." Behind him, the other officers stirred. One stepped closer, frowning. A second peered at Elvis's face, brow furrowed by the streetlight. Then, as if in slow motion, memory clicked. The angle of his jaw, the tilt of his chin, the very same features from posters and records. Murmurs rippled through the cluster of uniforms. A voice broke the tension. "Lieutenant, I think you—" It was Sergeant Bill Harmon, aging but authoritative, his old Marine bearing still intact. He pushed through, knuckles white on Elvis's shoulder. "Set it down, kid. That's Presley." The young officer's hand wavered. He blinked, lowering the gun with a shaky exhale that seemed to release the night itself. Elvis's shoulders sagged, relief fleeting and tempered by the realization of how close he'd come to disaster. Bill guided Elvis to the edge of the streetlight's glow. "You okay, Presley?" Elvis nodded, voice quiet. "I will be." He gave the officer a look that was neither reproachful nor condescending, just a steady reminder of the line between fear and respect. The boy tucked his pistol away, crimson creeping up his neck. "Sorry, sir, I didn't know." "No harm done," Elvis replied, his tone gracious. Behind them, Joe's son's distress still lingered, but for a heartbeat, the world had stood on its edge, and one man's composure had saved them both. The aftermath of that tense roadside encounter settled over Elvis like a damp shroud. He slid back behind the wheel of his Cadillac, the engine's rumble oddly comforting. Bill Harmon, the old sergeant who'd diffused the confrontation, climbed into the passenger seat. The rain had eased to a gentle patter now, and the streetlights cast pools of refracted gold on the wet pavement. "Elvis," Bill said quietly, "you still heading to the station?" Elvis ran a hand through his hair. "Joe's boy didn't have time to wait, Bill. We've got to find him before dawn." Bill nodded, gripping the seatbelt. "Let's do it." They trailed the patrol cars to the precinct, a squat brick building with a flickering neon sign, Memphis Police Department. Inside, the air was stale with cigarette smoke and anxiety. The lobby bustled with officers finishing their shifts and civilians clutching forms. At the reception desk, a weary dispatcher glanced up as Elvis approached, his hat in hand. "Detective Walker?" Elvis asked. "I was told I could see someone. Thomas Harper's son." The dispatcher hesitated, eyes widening as she recognized the visitor. A storm of whispers unfurled behind her. She punched a few numbers into the phone. Moments later, Detective Walker, a lean man in his 40s with a neatly trimmed mustache, emerged from a back office. His expression tightened at the sight of Elvis Presley standing under the harsh fluorescent lights. "Mr. Presley," Walker acknowledged, extending a firm hand, "we're just sorting out the charges. Michael Harper's being held on suspicion of aggravated trespass. It'll take a few hours to process." Elvis inhaled slowly, the weight of the night pressing on him. "I'll wait," he said. "He's young. He just made a mistake." Walker's eyes flicked toward Bill, as if seeking confirmation that this wasn't a paparazzi stunt. Bill nodded, and the detective led Elvis and Bill down a narrow corridor. The walls bore dark stains where too many questions had been asked, too many confessions uttered. They reached a steel door marked "Detention." Beyond it, the muffled sounds of barking inmates and clinking keys filtered through. A uniformed officer opened the door to a small holding cell. Michael Harper, perhaps 16, sat on the edge of a cot, shoulders hunched, face pale. His mother, Joe's wife, stood nearby, gripping his shoulder in silent relief. When the officer stepped aside, Michael looked up, disbelief and gratitude warring in his eyes. "Mr. Presley," he whispered. Elvis moved forward, crouching so he was eye-level with the frightened youth. "How you holding up, son?" Michael swallowed, voice trembling. I thought I was done for." Elvis's gaze was gentle but unwavering. "You're not. Everybody slips sometimes. What matters is how you get back up." Bill stepped back, allowing father and grandson from another life their moment. The boy's mother sobbed quietly, pressing her son into Elvis's jacket. Elvis offered a soft smile. "Tell your folks I'll handle the rest. And next time, call me first." Detective Walker cleared his throat. "Mr. Presley, we can release him on your word, but he'll need someone to sign for bail." Elvis nodded. "I'll take care of it. He stood, beckoning for Walker to follow. Behind him, Bill guided Michael and his mother toward the lobby. In the reception area, as Elvis signed the bail paperwork, those who had mocked him for soft hands now watched in stunned silence. His signature, scrawled but deliberate, sealed the boy's freedom. He slid the pen aside and looked up. "Just remember," Elvis said to Michael, voice low, "strength isn't about swinging first. It's about knowing when to stand down." He turned and walked away, leaving behind a precinct filled with officers who would later retell the night the king of rock and roll taught them the measure of true courage. The next morning's sunrise still shone pale against the steps of the Memphis Police Department when word reached Elvis that Officer Reynolds had been placed on administrative leave. The rumor mill churned furiously. Some called it an overreaction. Others muttered about protocol. But to Elvis, it was more than a disciplinary action. It represented a young man's fear, a glimpse of how dangerously fragile authority can be when wielded without compassion. By mid-morning, Elvis found himself once more at the precinct, not as a celebrity demanding attention, but as a concerned friend. Bill Harmon, his old comrade and unofficial confidant, accompanied him. The brass had arranged a small conference room, its linoleum floor streaked with scuffs, its walls hung with mugshots and commendation plaques. Reynolds sat at the table, arms folded, eyes downcast. Elvis took a seat across from him, folding his hands on the tabletop. The young officer's uniform, usually crisp and intimidating, looked oddly wilted. A single bead of sweat ran down his collarbone despite the air-conditioned chill. "Charlie," Elvis began, using the officer's first name, "I hear you got suspended last night." Reynolds glanced up, jaw tight. "Yes, sir. Protocol. After brandishing my weapon, You thought I was a threat," Elvis said gently, leaning forward. "You thought any move could be your last. I get it. You've got a duty to protect. But protecting doesn't always mean pointing a gun first." Silence filled the room. Bill watched quietly, arms folded, remembering those tense German nights when young Presley learned that true discipline came from within. Elvis continued, his voice low yet steady. "You and we both know fear. I faced mine in '69 when someone tried to take my hands. You faced yours last night. But the way you handled it, you froze. And when you froze, you forgot the other part of this badge." The young officer's shoulders shook. I'm sorry, Mr. Presley. I've never been so scared in my life." Elvis offered a small, sympathetic nod. "Good. Now feel that. Hold on to it for a moment, because sometimes that fear can teach you more about yourself than any fight." Reynolds swallowed. "What? What do I do now?" Elvis rose, smoothing the lapels of his plain shirt. "Come with me." Outside, the August air felt heavy. Elvis climbed into a waiting car. No black Cadillac, just an unmarked sedan from his private security detail. Behind him, Reynolds and Bill exchanged uncertain glances before sliding into the back seat. The drive led them out past crowded boulevards to a quiet stretch beyond the city limits. There, nestled among high desert scrub, stood a humble dojo, an unassuming warehouse repurposed by a handful of martial arts enthusiasts who'd once trained with Elvis during his army days. The low, corrugated roof sloped gently, and a single paper lantern swung softly beside the entrance. Inside, the floor was polished pine, worn smooth by years of practice. Wooden shields and old photographs of students lined the walls. Images of Presley in a dark GI, fists at ready, eyes unwavering. The scent of liniment and aged wood hung in the air, stirring memories of the master, Sensei Futaki, whose sudden passing had ended Presley's formal study. Reynolds hesitated at the threshold. Elvis led the way to the center of the mat, then turned to face him. "This was my sanctuary," Elvis said quietly. "It's where I learned that strength isn't just muscle. It's respect, control, and the silence inside before the storm." Reynolds eyed the photographs. I had no idea you trained here." Elvis offered a patient smile. "I didn't talk about it much, but it's time you saw what discipline looks like without a badge." He handed Reynolds a borrowed GI, its fabric slightly too large, the belt frayed at the ends. The young officer slipped it on, hands trembling. Elvis moved to the edge of the mat and bowed, a simple, respectful gesture. Reynolds mirrored him, uncertain but determined. Over the next hour, Elvis guided him through basic kata, each movement deliberate, each stance rooted in calm. Elvis demonstrated a block. Reynolds mirrored. Elvis executed a precise palm heel strike into the air. Reynolds repeated. The dojo's only sounds were the scrape of GI against mat, the soft exhalations of breath, and the distant rustle of desert wind at the windows. At one point, Elvis stopped the exercise. He faced Reynolds, his expression earnest. "You see," he said, "this isn't about proving you can hit someone. It's about knowing you don't have to." He stepped forward and placed a steady hand on Reynolds's shoulder. "Control is only yours when you choose to use it, or to not use it." Reynolds closed his eyes, swallowing. When he opened them, something in his gaze had shifted. The resigned fear replaced by a budding resolve. They finished with a bow. Elvis removed his GI top, folding it carefully. "You earned this lesson," he said. "Wear it under your uniform." Silence followed. No cameras, no applause, just two men bound by unexpected kinship. Bill, standing at the edge, nodded approvingly. As they walked back toward the car, Reynolds paused and looked at Elvis, voice raw. "Thank you, Mr. Presley. I don't know how to repay you." Elvis offered a half smile. "Just keep your gun holstered until you're sure it's the only answer. That's enough for me." The car rolled away into the desert night, leaving the dojo's warm glow behind. In that quiet space, a young officer found more than self-control. He discovered a measure of compassion he'd thought impossible in his line of work, all because the king of rock and roll chose to teach rather than to punish. The months that followed were, for Officer Charlie Reynolds, akin to living in two worlds at once. By day, he fulfilled his duties at the 18th Precinct, responding to calls, writing reports, and patrolling the same streets where that fateful night had nearly ended in tragedy. But every week, he slipped away from uniform and badge to the quiet outskirts dojo, where he met with Elvis Presley for further martial arts instruction. Their sessions were never trumpeted in the papers. The sergeant insisted upon discretion, and Elvis respected that. It was between two men, one a legend of music, the other a fledgling to authority, learning that true power lay in restraint. But a young officer's transformation cannot rest hidden forever. The precinct's new commanding officer, Captain Jerome Baxter, observed Reynolds's growing composure with suspicion at first. "You've changed," Baxter noted during a routine briefing. "You walk different. You talk different. You sure you still know how to police this city?" Reynolds merely nodded. He didn't need to explain. His newfound calm spoke louder than words. Still, word reached the academy. Young cadets, fresh-faced and brimming with bravado, began arriving at the police training center, expecting the usual regimen of drills and lectures. Instead, one crisp spring morning, they found themselves in a sparsely furnished hall lined with mirrors and hanging punching bags. At the front stood Reynolds, in civilian clothes, his service pistol holstered at his side, and beside him, unexpectedly, was Elvis Presley, dressed in a simple black GI and white belt. The cadets exchanged wide-eyed glances. Whispers fluttered through the room. "Is that? No way." He's really here. Reynolds cleared his throat, and the room snapped to attention. Good morning, he began evenly. I'd like to introduce someone who taught me what police training can't always teach. A sense of control, a respect for the value of life, and the difference between fear and authority. This is Mr. Elvis Presley. Elvis stepped forward, his presence as commanding as any general's, though his posture was relaxed, hands clasped gently before him. He nodded, acknowledging the room with a quiet dignity. The cadets, their initial astonishment giving way to reverence, sat or stood straighter. Reynolds spoke again. You wear that badge to protect. You carry that weapon because sometimes you must do what others cannot. But you must always remember, strength is not proved by pulling the trigger. It's proven by knowing you don't have to. That lesson came to me the hard way, on a dark stretch of road, when I nearly reacted before thinking. He let the moment hang before turning to Elvis. Sir, would you show them? Elvis moved to the center of the room. His feet were bare against the polished floor. With deliberate calm, he bowed to the cadets, exactly as he'd been taught years earlier in that desert dojo. Then he began a sequence of kata, classical forms that looked like dance to the untrained eye, but were in fact precise defense and counterattack drills. Each hand strike, each pivot of the hip, each placement of the foot was executed with utter control. There were no flying kicks, no flourishes for show, just the steely focus of a warrior who had danced on stage for millions, yet chosen to train quietly in the dark. As Elvis moved, Reynolds watched each cadet's face soften, the tension in their shoulders easing. It was as if the old barriers between star and student had melted away, replaced by an understanding that discipline transcends rank or fame. When the demonstration ended, Elvis bowed once more to the cadets, then to Reynolds, and stepped back. Silence reigned for a heartbeat. Then the cadets erupted in applause. Reynolds waited until calm returned. Every move he made, Reynolds said, taught me the same thing. To hold myself accountable, to think before I act, to value the life I protect. You may learn to shoot, but unless you learn to hold back the impulse to shoot, you are only half a police officer. You are half a person. He walked among the cadets, stopping before a young recruit whose knuckles were already bleeding from nervous shadowboxing. Son, he said gently, wrapping the boy's hand in his own palm. Feel the weight of that weight you carry, the responsibility. And know that every life you don't take because you chose discipline instead of fear is a victory more meaningful than any arrest. Elvis stepped forward, placing a hand on Reynolds's shoulder. His gravelly voice resonated in the hush. Discipline, respect, courage. Those are the chords I learned to play long ago. They're stronger than any tune. Remember that. The real strength of a man is what he holds in here. He tapped his chest lightly, then added, and in here, pointing to his head. A hush turned into a murmur of appreciation, cadets nodding, officers blinking back tears. Even the stern Captain Baxter, standing off to the side, looked moved. That afternoon, the Academy's bulletin board gained a new motto, handwritten on a crisp white sheet. Control is power. Beneath it, someone had scrawled EP and a small karate GI emblem. Weeks later, in Reed's pub near the precinct, Reynolds sat nursing a soda when a local reporter approached with a tape recorder. Officer Reynolds, she said timidly, word is you've been teaching classes inspired by Presley's dojo work. Any comments? Reynolds looked up, his gaze steady. Just doing my job, he said simply. Protect and serve, not with fear, but with respect. Outside, neon lights flickered, and Elvis's distant tenor wafted from a late-night radio. Reynolds closed his eyes, recalling that rainy night months ago when his finger had tensed on the trigger. "Thank you," he whispered into the cool air. In the following months, the Academy's graduation ceremonies changed. Alongside the display of firearms and uniform inspections, new cadets performed basic kata steps, bowing in unison. Trophies inscribed with Elvis's name adorned the halls, and somewhere, unseen, Elvis Presley, who could command arenas with a single note, smiled quietly. Content that his legacy now included a city's protectors, learning that real strength often arrives on silent feet.